Hey, worship teams, welcome back. Great to have you. Brandon Dempsey here, worship team training. We got everybody coming out on right now on Periscope, and we're so grateful that you've chosen to be with us here on the worship team hangout. So thank you so much. We love you. We come at you every other week, and it is a fantastic day. Today is November the 18th. We have Ryan Kennedy as our special guest, worship leader, and we're looking forward to the great times that we're going to have together. We have our friends, all of our friends here on Periscope. You can see they're all lighting up the screen with all their hearts. Thanks so much, guys, on Periscope, for sharing everything out. It's pretty awesome. So we got two live things going at the same time, and we're here to bring this show to you because you're worth it and you're awesome. And our friends on Periscope are awesome, and their worship too, and what they do. We thank them. So, guys, we want to say first hello to Rich Kirkpatrick, one of our awesome special co-hosts today. How you doing, Epic Stash?
I'm doing great, and I wish I could talk as fast as you talk.
It's just the radio voice in me. Can't help it.
It debunks any myth about Texans.
Because we don't all talk like this real slow.
That's West Texas, though, right?
That was more West Texas. East Texas is more like, I can't even do an East Texas accent. They're like, I don't know. Now I'm.
It's
not about me, Rich.
I'm sorry. I don't like it to be about. I'm glad to be here, though. Awesome.
That was so funny. Ryan can probably give us a good impersonation.
You know what? I don't know.
We'll have to find out. I know.
We're as not dialect as possible.
I know, exactly right. Stephanie, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Doing well. I was just trying to figure out how to get on Periscope myself, but I can't figure it out, so I'll figure it out for another time.
We'll do it another time. Great to have you. We had a fantastic time with you last night on our webinar talking about effective music building and worship planning.
Right. It was really fun. It was kind of chill and laid back, and yeah, we got more of a personal up close touch kind of thing happening. Wow, I'm just very articulate today.
Did she say? Don't know. Anyway, love you, Stephanie. It was awesome. We're going to have another webinar coming back with Stephanie, so it was lots of fun. And for today, we have our special guest, Ryan Kennedy. Ryan is a worship leader out here from Houston. He's right here in our local area. I had the pleasure of leading with him for the past couple of months over at our Saturday night worship service that we did here in the northwest area of Houston. Ryan Kennedy and his friend Nomi, who is a Swedish worship leader, awesome lady, great, compelling voice. Ryan Kennedy is an internationally touring Christian recording artist as well as worship leader here in Houston, Texas. Ryan has opened a tour with great people like Mercy Me, David Crowder, Jonathan Tolan, Sarah Kelly, Christy Knuckles, Highlands Worship, and Urban Rescue. Ryan says this, and just to quote him, "The church I work at has been through lots of changes in the past couple of years, and one of the main things I've learned is to know my people well and lead them in the way that is personal and familiar." I love that. So you can find more about Ryan Kennedy and his website and his music at ryankennedymusic.net, and check out, when you're there, his new album, Another Moment. I got it right here. I got my copy fresh from Ryan. I've been listening to it this morning, and I love it, so you got to check out Ryan Kennedy. So without further ado, everybody, please welcome Ryan Kennedy. Ryan, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me on the show.
Man, it's awesome to have you today. And I was just commenting when we first got on the air, we were kind of doing rehearsal and talking about how it's weird seeing you on the screen because I'm always used to seeing you live
in person. Yeah.
So it's kind of weird, but you're
two-dimensional now.
Exactly, two-dimensional. That's not always the not as fun, but but anyway, it's good. So today, be sure, guys, as we're going through today, last 2 weeks we had a great discussion and talking about how we lead worship. What are some effective ways that we can really getting to the heartbeat of our church. And so if you haven't yet checked out the last one, coming up, we are going to have some other fantastic guests coming. We have Laura Marriott, who is a great friend of Stephanie right here. So we're looking forward to having Laura on. And also we have more of this guy, again I said this guy, and the camera's not responding very well. Rich Kirkpatrick.
It's a smart
Rick.
camera.
Yeah, he's smart. He's very smart. He's as smart as you can get with the stash. You can't beat it. I mean, look at that. Look at the handlebars in that thing. You can put a motorcycle underneath it. So anyway, you're going to have more Rich Kirkpatrick coming up. Rich is going to be doing some more webinars with us about our worship teams and the way we lead worship, working with our pastors, working with our existing worship leaders, and so that's going to be a lot of fun. But today, we are talking about the whole point of style and trend. Are those the two things that lead worship, style and trend in your church, or is it something else that really leads people in worship? What's the deal with that? So, our first question today: why, when we think about the whole idea of leading worship, and we think about style and trend. First, I just want to go to you, Ryan. What does that mean to you, style and trend versus true worship? Can you kind of help us dissect that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think we, as a church, we've been in transition for the past 4 years. We had I've been at the church that I've been at. I've grown up in the church I work at now, and we were always kind of a more conservative church, and just music-wise conservative. And we brought in a new pastor about 4 years ago, and he was a young guy from California, and we wanted to kind of reach a new demographic, a new audience, and so we started trying to do more contemporary music, and then they brought me in as the worship leader. And I think over the past, about the first 2 years while I was there, I think we tried almost every different type of worship style. We were like almost worship schizophrenic, just to try to find the right place to land. And because the way I see it is it's kind of like a pendulum, and you can kind of go, there's a middle ground that your church lands at, and so you can go a little too far past it on the contemporary side, you can go too far past it on the traditional side, right, and then you're just not hitting really anyone. And so I think the difference too is, I mean, basically I've kind of come to the conclusion that regardless of if we use big lights and loud drums, or if we just use an acoustic guitar and no lights at all, my heart is for my people to worship Jesus. And so I'm just going to do everything I possibly can as the worship leader to get them to that point. And, you kind of have to just, die to yourself, because sometimes we want certain sounds, or we think that's the coolest thing that's going on. Oh, Bethel's doing this, so let's try that. But I think the main thing that I've found is that your church is unique, and so you have to be unique to what your church is doing. Bethel is awesome for what Bethel is doing, but that might not work in your situation. Gateway worship is great for Gateway, but it might not work in your environment. And there's little things that they do that you can pull from, but you really need to pray through it and find what the best type of worship environment and style that fits your people. And the only way to do that is to know your people, one, and then to also just seek counsel from God and from your pastor. And I have a really close relationship with the pastor I work at and I work with, so we talk a lot about this type of stuff. Some worship leaders might not have that much say in it, so then you really do need to seek the counsel of your pastor when it comes to things like this. But I guess if your question was what's the difference, I would say the trend is more the environment and the style. And then the worship is like what I was saying, how we just want our people to be worshiping Jesus in spirit and truth, and no matter what it takes to get there is where that style will land.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, very good, very good. When we talk about style and we talk about people, one thing I know you resonated with, and your quote that you said, Ryan, was about knowing your people. So, Rich, can you kind of expound on that a little bit about that? How important is it for us as worship leaders to know our people?
I think it's really important, of course. But first of all, what is a trend and what is language? There's a difference there, because music isn't just a language; it's also art, meaning that it's subjective. Language is something that is less subjective, but yet it is as well. We all have our own colloquialisms or things like that. So, if you live in different parts of the country, so knowing your people is related to understanding kind of what resonates with them.
Right.
And the way you do that, it takes time. Kind of the fast, compressed time machine that sounds like Ryan went through when you're in a big, immediate transition. The hope is that you do that slower in a way too, because sometimes you're not able to. But I think the best way to know people is to, do exactly what Ryan did, but hopefully have more time to do it. You just listen to folks. You find out what resonates with them. But then again, I have to say you got to be careful, because it's not like a marketing. You're not trying to market something. I just went to like a movie screening. I do a few of those every so often. It's kind of fun, and they want to find out, how do we change the ending so that people like it better, and things like that. There's a fine line between like communication and what resonates with folks, and then actually, what is their voice, because our pastors want us to think like them sometimes. They're communicators. So there's sermon illustrations. They say if I preach a boring sermon, it's a sin, right? Because it's a transaction that comes from the platform to the people. The difference that a worship leader has is, how do I help people sing in their voice?
Right.
So when I listen, what I'm listening for is, how do I, who's an artist who has my own expression, how do I then allow the folks out there, because it's their worship, to have a voice in what's happening. And I think that's really, I don't know a clear answer to that, but I think that's the question that has to be asked, is how does a congregation, how do we help the congregation sing in their voice as a worship leader?
That's good. Stephanie, when we talk about like knowing our congregation, how do you determine the needs of your congregation before you pick songs?
Well, can you hear me, by the way? Because I think my connection might have been iffy.
Yeah,
Is it
no,
okay?
great.
Okay. I think being open to their feedback is important, and even actually seeking feedback is important. You open yourself up to criticism, but we have to learn how to deal with that. But hearing from the people and just being intentional about finding what kind of songs generally touch them, and listening to see when they're singing and when they're not singing, when they're dropping out, maybe because the key is too out of their range. Practical things like that. If suddenly they're not singing, asking yourself, is it the tempo? What's happening here? Is the sound sketchy? Those kind of things. Just being aware of what's happening, I think really helps us to know our congregation. And then spending time with them to just know what's going on in their lives. We spent a lot of time talking about that last night, but being their shepherd, really being their pastor. And every person, I believe, on the team has a responsibility to mentor and shepherd, whether they are the primary worship leader or on staff or not. We're all to disciple and to mentor and just to be Christ to people. So we should be taking on those roles and encouraging our teams to take on those roles, because that's how we find out the needs of our congregation.
Right. Ryan, you want to take a little slice of that also?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Stephanie. I think, when I started this, I was hired on as a full-time worship leader at 19, so I really didn't know what I was doing, and so I've learned so much. I think God has put me in this church to teach me quite a bit, but I think it takes a lot of courage, like Stephanie was saying, to go to the people because there is the chance of negative feedback. But I've found that all feedback is good, and you can't be afraid of the negative feedback because it's going to lead to a better worship experience. So you can't take it personally either. I did that at first. Every time I heard a negative comment about worship, I took it personally, like it was an attack on me as a worship leader, and that's not necessarily the case. They're longing to be a part of a worship experience that they can connect to, and like what Rich was saying, that's in their language, that's in their culture. And so I think really at first I was almost just like, I've got this, I know what I'm doing, I've seen how other worship teams do it, this is cool, I know what I'm doing. And I found that once I started going out to have coffee with these guys and I started asking them if they looked, if during the worship set I saw someone just stop singing and cross their hands, I would go up to them after the worship experience and just ask them, what are some songs that might help you get into the worship experience better, or what are some songs that are more familiar with you? I think a lot of the times, people are just not familiar with the songs, and then they just stop. Yeah. And so we have to be careful. There's so many great songs coming out, but we have to be careful not to throw too many of them at once, because then we're musicians. We can think of it real quick. I can listen to Good Good Father, and the next time I listen to it, I can sing along with it. But some people don't have that capacity, and so we just have to be. I think the best way to know your people is to talk to them. Communication is one of the biggest things that I think most people, even I've seen on lots of church staffs. I've gotten to tour lots of churches and just been able to talk to lots of worship leaders, and communication seems to be the one thing that just never really happens. And I don't know why that is, but really we've tried to create just a pipeline of robust communication between the staff and between our people at our church, and we're open to it. And really I've seen so much improvement in that just by hearing from my people. It's they're who we're leading, and so we need to hear from them, and so, yeah, I totally agree.
Barry Westman, who is on Periscope right now, asked a really good question. And Barry, I caught it earlier what you were saying. He had asked a question, with all the many voices in the church and different styles to appeal to and everything, how do you determine that one voice to be it? Ryan?
Well, our church did something that is a little weird and controversial, but they did 2 different services, which at first I was against. And I'm still not completely convinced, because what that does is it creates almost 2 churches within one church. Yeah. We have one that does traditional, it's called Classic Blend, so we do traditional and some contemporaries. And then we have our second service, which is just full contemporary. And so I personally wouldn't recommend that, because I've seen how it kind of there's like a weird fault line between the different generations, and I think we as a church want to be multicultural, multi-generational, and so we try to teach our people to, be open to seeing that some people worship a certain way and you worship this way. But, at first I was against hymns. I never sang hymns when I grew up. That wasn't my thing, and so I didn't understand it. I didn't really know how to do hymns. But once I found out that a lot of people resonate with hymns, and you can do them in a way that is really effective, and even in a contemporary worship set, you can do hymns that are super effective. We've almost given ourselves the freedom to have almost an eccentric worship set that is not one specific thing. You may come one Sunday and we do more hymns than we normally do. You may come another Sunday and we don't do any hymns. You may come one Sunday and we have haze and lights. You may come the next Sunday. We've just kind of released the freedom to say we're a church for all people, and we want to make sure that we're hitting all the different generations. And we did a survey actually, and we found that our church is literally 50-50. And so we kind of used that as the freedom to just say we're just gonna try to put everything that we've heard from you together into one set, and it seems to be working. It's complicated. I think that's a problem. You have 400 people, and each person has their different view of what worship should be, and so what we decided is we're just going to find out what the biggest group of those people, what they say connects them best in worship, and then we're just going to go with that. And then we pray through it, and that's what we heard from God, to just create an eccentric type of worship ministry. That might not work for every church, but we found that it works because we have so many different likes and dislikes. If you come one Sunday and it's not quite what you want, the next Sunday is going to be different. And so we mixed it up. That's what we found worked. I'm sure that wouldn't work at every church, but that's what we found that worked.
Yeah.
Can I jump in for a minute?
Yeah, go for it, Steph.
I absolutely believe, Ryan, that is the way to go. If you had one way to go, that's the way to go. And the reason I say that is I've worked at like 4 pretty big mega churches in like 18 years, and I've never had to do a service that was just traditional or just contemporary, and I just really believe more and more, and even as my musical palette like gets wider, and I love Jesus Culture and Bethel and Elevation, I think what they're doing is incredible.
Right.
So my musical palette is getting wider, and yet I feel like to keep all generations worshiping together is the number one like calling of the Lord to his church in these last days. I think we have to get away from the mindset that we're pleasing ourselves, and we need each other, and I also have been thinking more and more, okay, I have 6 nephews that, how are we going to get them into church?
Right.
They love the young music. But I also have an aunt who is in a nursing home now with severe Alzheimer's, and the only music that touches her is her generation and her hymns, but it's keeping her brain active.
Right.
And it's like, this is real. This is real stuff, and I just think that separating the church is not what we should be doing.
Right.
It's one more thing that Christians fight about. It's that it just gives a bad rap to Christianity, and we've got to come together in these.
What we've done, Stephanie. I think if I may, I think what we've done is we've turned our entitlement and we market to it.
Wow.
So I think
we real quick, Keys of Life, Clarence just said, how do you try that with a young congregation?
Yeah, I think if you have a young congregation,
and communication.
Right. I'd say if you have a young congregation and there's no old people in it, and they're not visiting old folks' homes, they're not trying to reach people that don't look like them, then it's a Instagram version of Christianity. It's not a full version of Christianity. And so worship, it's not easy what Ryan is doing, and I would concur with Stephanie, because it takes more musicianship to be able to try to learn different styles. And a lot of folks that end up in leadership positions don't have the capacity, or the leaders don't give them enough time, is the main issue, so that they can acquire different styles of music. So styles of music to me are just spices, but spices are powerful. And we have to be careful about alienating young folks, sure, but if 50% of the population are women, how many women are leading on our platforms? And I I liked Barry's question because I saw it before, and
Yeah.
the question about who gets to decide the style.
Right.
I really think it's a family. So a
Yeah.
family talks about stuff. You work through. Kids learn from the older folks, but the older folks have to learn they're not entitled to. They have to learn to pass on and let go.
Right.
And so, but that takes relationship, and I just concur with what Ryan was saying about, you have to talk to people, you have to be there, and we focus so much on platform that we don't look at what we do off platform with people.
Exactly.
Right.
Sometimes if they like us better off platform, and we experiment on the next week, and they might let us do it.
Right.
We're so
Exactly.
scared. Brandon, I think we're too scared. Anyway, that's
Yeah,
scary.
I think there's you almost have to, like what Rich was saying, you have to almost build that level of trust with them so that you can have the freedom to do something on the platform. Because if they don't trust you, then they're just going to be against you from the start. But once you have that relationship with them, they're open to that. And it takes, like, we speak on it now, like, it's interesting because you're dealing with older people who are super wise and they've been in the church forever, but you can't neglect to teach them, like what Rich was saying, that you can't be afraid to teach them that there are different styles and we need to be for the young, but we also need to be for the old. We need to be for everyone. That's the church.
Right.
And I appreciate my pastor trying to be a multi-generational, multicultural church. I think it's a huge platform to land on, and I've told him many times before, I've said, this would be so much easier if we just chose a much smaller demographic to try to hit. But it's almost exciting to see our congregation and to see so many different ages and so many different cultures. And it's almost like a mini glimpse of heaven sometimes, because you're just like, this is what it's going to be like. Right. We're all around that throne singing, holy, holy, holy. This is what it's going to look like. It's not just going to be 20 and 30s singing the latest Bethel song,
Right.
And I think just to add to the whole hymn thing, because that wasn't my thing, I do have to say, even with the newer amazing songs that are being written, there is some theology in hymns that is just so wonderful that even if you are in a young church and you're not one of these churches that has to do hymns, I would encourage you to try to add them, because there's so much good theology and good messages that if you tied it to a newer song, man, when I do a contemporary song and then we tie a hymn into it, it is so powerful, because you have a contemporary song that connects better with our generation, but then you have this strong lyrical theology behind it, and it almost reinforces what we just sang in a more creative, like the contemporary songs are more creatively written now, but these strong hymns, they just back it up. And so if you have people who are maybe against some of the contemporary stuff, if you can show them this hymn that backs up the theology in the contemporary song, it all just works out. And that's just a microcosm of what we're talking about. It should be everything. It should be all culture, all age.
Wow.
I have to say, I will die on that hill, and I'm so encouraged, Ryan, because you're a young guy, you know, and I just feel like you get it, and that's what it's about, and that one hymn is going to make a difference to that older person, pardon the stereotype, but that really needs to be around that younger family, pouring wisdom into them.
Right.
Yeah, I think that we have one of our viewers on Periscope saying that you can't please everybody. Absolutely, you can't. But we need to learn how to build those relational bridges, because music is a deep, deep root with a lot of people. It's like, somebody else's radio station. You wouldn't just go into their car and just start changing their presets. You get knocked out the window. And the church is the same way. People look at it as, well, this is my church, even though it's not. We know that from the biblical standpoint, but that's just how other people think. And so how do we how do we bridge those relationships in a healthy way? And at the same time, I love doing the hymns, number one, and I also do it in a way of relating to the other generations in the church. I think the blended thing has gone away. I think it's my opinion, it doesn't work as well. It may work for your church, but in some of our experiences, blended is kind of a tough thing to pull off because of that reason, where you're having to feel like you're pleasing this section of the group, this other section of the church room, and it just feels kind of weird. But there is a way to interweave it together, and that's something that Rich does a lot of very well. And if you're able to do that, to speak to the different generations, to bring in the old heritage, to speak the new songs, like Psalm 96:1 that says to sing out a new song, there's a way that we can do those things effectively that can bridge those gaps versus us trying to just have style dictate the worship service that we are to do. So that brings me to my last question. How do you avoid, Ryan, how do you avoid trend versus what your church needs?
Man, I would say when you go to these national worship leaders conferences or like the WFX conferences, you'll see some of the latest technology, you'll see some of the latest trends in worship, you'll hear the newest songs, and you'll think, that is so cool. And then you'll go back to your church and you'll try to replicate that exactly as they did it. And then you'll find that it falls flat because it worked there, but it's not. You've forgotten that your church is unique and you have a specific mission and vision and call that God has put on that church. And so I think it's great to go to those conferences. It's great to go to WFX and see all the new technology that's out. But I would say use it sparingly. Don't try to completely. Carrie Job said one time, the one thing that's going to hamper your ministry the most is comparison.
Yeah.
And I think that is so true. And also, in the same vein, it's copying. Because God has given that ministry that specific call, and it's not the same thing that's on your church. And so, yes, they're doing great things. And so even when I tour, I get to tour churches almost every weekend. And every time I go in, I try to find the one thing they're doing the best. And I bring it back and I talk to my pastor and I say, this church is doing welcome ministry so good. Or this church is doing projection so good. They have lyrics on the main screen and then they have verses that support it on the side screen. They're doing that awesome. How can we use that within our context of our worship experience?
Right.
So I think the best way to not follow a trend is to try not to copy it exactly as is, but to take the best parts that fit your church best. And again, you're going to need the trust with your congregation because you might try something and it doesn't work. So it all goes together. But I think just remembering that you have a specific call that God has put on you to lead that body in a certain way, and to not get so caught up in saying, this isn't the coolest thing that's out there. Guess what? You're cool doing what's best at your place.
Right.
So, but I do encourage you to find the good things that the other bigger churches that are getting lots of attention are doing, and finding the best way that maybe there's one thing that Bethel does that you can do. There's one thing that Hillsong does that you can do. There's one thing that Elevation does that you can introduce into your service. But don't try to be those people. Be who God has called you to be, and just use that as resources instead of a vision for what you should do.
Awesome. I love it. Golly, that's just a whole show. Wonderful, wonderful description,
Amen.
Brian. So thanks, man.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So a lot here in this show, a lot here through Periscope interaction here on YouTube. I'm jotting down all these different notes of what was happening, and so this is just great. I mean, this is one of our most introspective shows. Oh, I'm sorry, without Tony Guerrero. So Tony like missed the boat on this one, but that's okay because Tony probably would. We would have to keep him from stealing the show.
You just sort of monopolize everything.
Yeah, Tony has something to say even when he's not here. You know. So
We
anyway,
love you, Tony.
we love Tony. Tony's awesome. Tony's awesome. So he'll be back joining us. Let's see, at Wonder Woman. Thanks so much, and at Keys of Life on Periscope. Guys, we thank you. You can find Ryan Kennedy and his music in his latest album, Another Moment, at ryankennedymusic.net. So make sure that you go there. Ryan, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your heart.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. And of course, our very lovely Stephanie Kelly, thank you so much for being with us today as well. And our most astute host, Rich Kirkpatrick, with the fancy November mustache. It's got arms on it, and it waves at people.
It was a zip code, my bro.
Yeah.
It waves in the wind. It's zip code. That's awesome. Guys, thanks so much for joining us today here on YouTube Live and also on Periscope. This is fantastic. You got to check out next Tuesday night, Tim Timmons. We have another webinar coming up, Tim Timmons on leading worship. That's on the 24th of November at 8 p.m. Go to worshipteamtraining.com/events. It's free. These are free webinars, by the way. And then we hit another one with our very own Rich Kirkpatrick. We're going to be talking about how do you plan your Sunday to Sunday in December Christmas theme type Sundays, and how do you keep those fresh? So be sure to hit us up, worshipteamtraining.com/events, and you will see Rich Kirkpatrick there as we talk about how do we keep our Christmas stuff going. We're going to have more from Stephanie Kelly coming up as well. So we have a lot to hit at you. Also, very happening things on the blog site on Worship Team Training coming up. Be sure to check out also our mentoring program, worshipteamtraining.com/mentoring, if you want to be mentored by Stephanie Kelly and great people also like Rich Kirkpatrick and Tony Guerrero, myself included. We love to be on the journey with you. So, man, we've gone really long today. Thank you very much, Periscope. Follow us on Periscope. All you guys, if you haven't, just search Worship Team Training. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Google, Instagram, Pinterest, LinkedIn, everywhere else. So, but we're glad that you chose your time to spend with us today. So thank you, friends on Periscope and on YouTube. We love you guys. We'll see you back soon on the next Worship Team Training Hangout. So may God's blessings flow to you and your worship team. Thanks so much.